A nurse's kind gesture to a dying patient uncovers a family secret that changes her forever. The words echoed in Emma's mind as she stared at her reflection in the hospital bathroom mirror, her blue eyes rimmed with exhaustion. The overnight shift had stretched her thin like butter scraped over too much bread. 26 hours without proper sleep, and all she could think about was that stupid fortune cookie message she'd cracked open during her dinner break. Such a melodramatic prediction for someone who'd long ago stopped believing in life-changing moments. Emma splashed cold water on her face, the shock of it momentarily clearing the fog from her mind. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows beneath her eyes, aging her beyond her 32 years. She dried her hands and straightened her scrubs, adjusting her badge that read, Emma Winters, RN, before walking back into the controlled chaos of the oncology ward. Emma, Mr. Callahan in 514 needs his evening meds, the charge nurse called out as Emma passed the station. And he's been asking for you specifically. A small sigh escaped her lips before she could catch it. Patient attachment wasn't unusual, but she'd been trying to maintain professional distance lately. Emotional boundaries were her specialty, had been ever since the divorce 2 years ago, when David had left her for his dental hygienist, taking half their savings and all of her trust with him. I've got it, Emma replied, already heading toward the medication room. As she prepared the evening dose of pain medication, she mentally reviewed Mr. Callahan's chart. Terminal pancreatic cancer, admitted 3 weeks ago. No living relatives listed. Another lonely soul preparing to exit the world. The thought sent a familiar ache through her chest that she quickly suppressed. Room 514 was dimly lit when she entered, the only illumination coming from the muted television mounted on the wall. Thomas Callahan, 74 years old with a face that reminded Emma of weathered leather, lay propped against the pillows, his once robust frame now skeletal beneath the thin hospital blanket. There she is, he said, his voice a raspy whisper. His smile revealed teeth yellowed from decades of coffee and cigarettes. My guardian angel. Just doing my job, Mr. Callahan, Emma replied, the practiced warmth in her voice perfected over years of patient care. Time for your evening meds. Thomas, he corrected, as he did every time. After 3 weeks of watching me die, I think we're on a first-name basis, don't you? Emma measured out water in a small paper cup, her movements efficient. Hospital policy recommends professional boundaries, Mr. Callahan. The old man chuckled, the sound dissolving into a cough that rattled his chest. Emma quickly helped him sit up straighter, placing a gentle hand on his back until the spasm passed. Professional boundaries, he wheezed once he could speak again. Seems to me you've got enough boundaries for the whole damn hospital. Something in his directness caught her off guard, and Emma felt a flicker of discomfort. Most patients didn't notice, or at least didn't comment on, her careful emotional distancing. She busied herself with checking his IV line. You remind me of someone, Thomas said quietly, his eyes suddenly sharper as they studied her face. Someone I knew a long time ago. I have that kind of face, Emma replied lightly, handing him the medication cup. 1 pill at a time, please. Thomas obediently took the pills but continued watching her with unnerving intensity. No, it's something specific. Something in the eyes. The way you tuck your hair behind your ear when you're thinking hard about something. Emma's hand froze mid-motion, realizing she'd been doing exactly that. She quickly dropped her hand to her side. You're very observant. Not much else to do in here except observe, Thomas replied with a sad smile. And remember? As he finished his medication, Emma checked his vitals, recording them in the electronic chart. His blood pressure was lower than yesterday, his oxygen saturation declining slowly but steadily. The inevitable progression. Would you do something for me? Thomas asked suddenly, his bony fingers reaching for her wrist. His touch was light but insistent. Just a small thing. Emma hesitated. She'd learned the hard way that small things for terminal patients could become complicated quickly, but something in the old man's expression, a mixture of hope and resignation, made her nod. What do you need? There's a box in my personal belongings, he said. Nothing valuable, just some old photographs. Would you bring it to me? The night feels longer when you can't sleep. It was a simple request, harmless. Emma nodded. I'll get it for you before I finish my rounds. Thank you, Emma. Her name in his mouth sounded weighted somehow, as though he were testing it. Later, after checking on her other patients, Emma retrieved the small cardboard box from the hospital storage room. It was lightweight, secured with a faded rubber band that had lost most of its elasticity. She carried it back to room 514, where Thomas was still awake, staring out the darkened window at the city lights beyond. "Here you are," she said, placing the box on his tray table. "Do you need anything else before I go?" Thomas patted the edge of the bed. "Sit with me a moment, please?" The night shift can be so lonely. Emma glanced at her watch. She had other patients waiting, other medications to administer, but the plaintive note in his voice struck something inside her. 5 minutes wouldn't hurt. "Just for a minute," she said, perching carefully on the edge of the bed. Thomas removed the rubber band with trembling fingers and opened the box. Inside were several faded photographs, their colors dulled by time. He sorted through them with reverent care until he found one particular image. "This was my wife, Eleanor," he said, handing Emma a photograph of a beautiful young woman with dark hair and bright eyes, standing beside a much younger Thomas on what appeared to be their wedding day. "She died 30 years ago. Cancer, like me. Funny how things come full circle." "She was beautiful," Emma said softly, studying the happiness captured in that frozen moment. "She was everything," Thomas replied, his voice catching. "We had such plans, such dreams." As Thomas continued to sort through the photographs, Emma found herself drawn into his stories, tales of a life well lived but cut short by tragedy. The 5 minutes she'd promised stretched to 15, then 30. Something about the old man's narrative broke through her careful barriers, reminding her of evenings spent listening to her own grandfather's stories before he'd passed away when she was 12. "And this," Thomas said, pulling out a slightly larger photograph, "this was the cottage where Eleanor grew up. Her parents' home in Lakeside." Emma took the photograph, and a strange sensation crawled up her spine. The small white cottage with blue shutters and a wraparound porch looked eerily familiar. "Lakeside? The one near Cedar Point?" Thomas nodded. "You know it?" "I grew up near there," Emma said slowly, studying the photograph more carefully. The massive oak tree in the front yard, the stone pathway leading to the porch, they triggered something in her memory that she couldn't quite place. "This house seems familiar somehow." Thomas's eyes brightened with interest. "Really? It's still there as far as I know. Eleanor's parents sold it after she died. Couldn't bear to stay, I suppose." Emma handed the photograph back, a strange discomfort settling in her chest. "It's probably just similar to other houses in the area. Lakeside has a specific architectural style." But as she said it, a fragment of memory surfaced. Herself as a little girl, standing on a porch just like that one, her small hand engulfed in her father's larger one as he knocked on a door. "My shift is ending soon," Emma said abruptly, standing up. "I should finish my rounds." "Of course," Thomas said, carefully returning the photographs to their box. "Thank you for indulging an old man's nostalgia." At the door, Emma paused, looking back at the frail figure in the bed. "Get some rest, Mr. Callahan. I'll see you tomorrow evening." "I'll be here," he replied with a wry smile. "Not going anywhere just yet." But something in his expression suggested otherwise, and Emma felt a twinge of professional concern. His vitals had been declining steadily all week. The oncologist had already adjusted his care plan to comfort measures only. Days, maybe a week at most, according to the prognosis. When Emma left the hospital that morning, the autumn air carried a biting chill that seeped through her jacket. Her apartment was only 15 minutes away by car, but the drive felt longer, her mind preoccupied with Thomas's photographs and the strange sense of recognition she'd felt. Perhaps it was just fatigue playing tricks on her mind. 3 12-hour shifts in a row tended to do that. Her apartment greeted her with the same sterile emptiness it always did, a space that 2 years after the divorce still felt more like temporary housing than a home. Emma dropped her keys on the counter and headed straight for the shower, letting the hot water wash away the hospital smell of antiseptic and illness. Afterward, wrapped in her robe, she made a cup of chamomile tea and stood by the window, watching the early morning light spread across the city. Sleep tugged at her consciousness, but her mind remained stubbornly awake, circling back to the cottage in Thomas's photograph. On impulse, Emma retrieved a cardboard box from the hall closet, one of the few she had never unpacked after moving out of the house she'd shared with David. It contained childhood mementos her mother had given her before selling the family home and moving to Florida, report cards, artwork, photographs. Sitting cross-legged on the floor, Emma began to sort through the contents. Most of it was mundane, school pictures showing her progression from a gap-toothed 7-year-old to a serious teenager, participation ribbons from swim meets, birthday cards from long-forgotten friends. And then she found it, a photograph she hadn't looked at in years. Emma and her father standing in front of a white cottage with blue shutters, her small face beaming up at the camera, his arm around her shoulders. The same house from Thomas's photograph. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she turned the picture over. Written in her mother's neat handwriting, Emma and Dad visiting Great-Aunt Marion, Lakeside, 1995. Great-Aunt Marion. A name she hadn't thought of in decades, a distant relative she'd met only once or twice as a child before her father's death. The connection seemed impossible, yet the evidence was there in her hands. Sleep forgotten, Emma reached for her laptop and began searching through public records, her nurse's meticulous nature driving her to understand this strange coincidence. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, death records, the digital breadcrumbs of lives intertwined in ways she had never known. 3 hours later, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, Emma sat back, stunned by what she had discovered. Her great-aunt Marion had been born Marion Eleanor Winters, before marrying and becoming Marion Sullivan. She had a younger sister named Eleanor, who had married Thomas Callahan in 1967, which meant that the dying man in room 514, the patient who had been under her care for the past 3 weeks, was her great-uncle by marriage, a relative she had never known existed. Emma stared at her laptop screen until the words blurred. It didn't make sense. Her father had rarely spoken about his family, and after his sudden death when Emma was 14, her mother had seemed reluctant to discuss them. There had been no extended family at his funeral, no relatives reaching out afterward, just Emma and her mother, isolated in their grief. Why had her father never mentioned Thomas? Why had Thomas never said anything if he recognized her name? The questions multiplied, keeping sleep at bay despite her exhaustion. When Emma finally did sleep, her dreams were filled with fragmented images: the cottage with blue shutters, her father's face, Thomas as a young man in the wedding photograph, holding hands with a woman who somehow had Emma's eyes. She woke disoriented as evening approached, her shift starting in just 2 hours. The discovery lay heavy in her mind as she prepared for work, uncertain of how to proceed. Should she tell Thomas that she knew? Ask him about the past? Or was it kinder to maintain professional distance, to spare a dying man complicated explanations? The hospital hummed with its usual evening activity when Emma arrived, but her steps felt leaden as she approached the oncology floor. Before she could even check in at the nurse's station, the charge nurse intercepted her. "Emma, I was just about to call you. Mr. Callahan took a turn this afternoon. His oxygen levels dropped and his kidney function is declining rapidly. The doctor's been in. He's not expected to make it through the night." A cold weight settled in Emma's stomach. "Has anyone been notified? Any family?" The charge nurse shook her head. "There's no one listed in his file. Just his lawyer as the emergency contact, and he's been informed. No one." The words echoed in Emma's mind as she mechanically went through the motions of checking in, reviewing charts, preparing for her shift. "No one except me," she thought. "I'm his family, and he doesn't even know." When Emma entered room 514, the change in Thomas was immediately apparent. His skin had taken on a grayish cast, his breathing shallow and labored despite the oxygen flowing through the nasal cannula. The monitor beside his bed showed the steady decline of his vital signs, the inevitable march toward the end. "Thomas?" Emma said softly, approaching the bed. His eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus. "Eleanor?" he whispered, reaching a trembling hand toward her. "It's Emma," she corrected gently, taking his hand. The nurse. Recognition slowly dawned in his clouded eyes. "Emma. Of course. I was dreaming." He tried to smile, but the effort seemed to exhaust him. "Bad timing, I'm afraid. Seems I've decided not to wait for those evening meds after all." Despite everything, Emma found herself smiling at his gallows humor. "I heard you've had a rough day. Is there anything I can do to make you more comfortable?" Thomas's fingers tightened weakly around hers. "Just stay a while. If you can." Emma pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat, still holding his hand. The professional boundaries she'd so carefully maintained seemed absurd now, knowing what she knew. This was her family, perhaps the last living connection to her father's side of the family tree. "Thomas," she began, uncertain how to broach the subject. "I looked at those photographs you showed me. The cottage in Lakeside. Beautiful place," he murmured, his eyes drifting closed before opening again with visible effort. "Full of memories. I think..." I think we might be related, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. My great-aunt was Marion Sullivan, born Marion Winters, Eleanor's sister. Thomas's eyes widened slightly, a spark of life returning to them. Marion's great-niece? Richard's daughter? Emma nodded, emotion tightening her throat. Richard Winters was my father. For a long moment, Thomas simply stared at her, his gaze traveling over her features as though seeing them for the first time. That's why you seem so familiar. You have the Winters eyes. Eleanor's eyes. His own filled with tears. Richard's little girl. All grown up. Why didn't you say something when you saw my name tag? Emma asked, confused. Winters isn't that common a name? Thomas's expression clouded. I wasn't sure. There was a falling out years ago before you were born. Your grandfather, Eleanor's brother, he disapproved of me. Thought I wasn't good enough for his sister. When Eleanor died, the rift became permanent. The Winters family wanted nothing to do with me. But my father took me to visit Marion, Emma said, remembering the photograph. In 1995, Thomas nodded weakly. Richard was different, more forgiving. He stayed in touch with Marion despite his father's wishes. But by then, I had moved away, started a new life. Too much pain in the old one. He paused, his breathing becoming more labored. I never knew he had a daughter until he died. Car accident, wasn't it? Yes, Emma whispered, the old grief rising inside her. I was 14. I read the obituary, Thomas continued. Thought about reaching out to you and your mother, but what could I offer? A stranger claiming distant family ties? It seemed selfish. Emma fought back tears, thinking of all the years of loneliness after her father's death, the absence of extended family that had always felt like a mystery. We could have known each other all this time. Life has its own timing, Thomas replied with a sad smile. Like now, finding you in the last days of my life, a gift I don't deserve. A tear escaped, trailing down Emma's cheek. I wish I had known sooner. Tell me about him, Thomas said suddenly. Richard. Was he happy? Before the accident? And so, as the night deepened around them, Emma spoke of her father, his laugh that always started as a chuckle before exploding into full-bodied joy, his passion for sailing on Lake Erie, his collection of vinyl records that he would play on Sunday mornings while making pancakes, the way he taught Emma to ride a bike, running alongside her until she found her balance. In turn, Thomas shared stories of Eleanor, her fierce intelligence, her love of poetry, her dream of becoming a teacher cut short by her illness. He spoke of the family histories Emma had never known, her grandfather's stern but principled nature, her grandmother's secret passion for painting landscapes, the summer house in Lakeside where the Winters children had spent their vacations. As the monitors beeped softly in the background, tracking Thomas's gradual decline, Emma felt the empty spaces in her personal history beginning to fill, gaps in her identity she hadn't even recognized until now. There's something else you should know, Thomas said, his voice growing weaker. In the box of photographs, there's an envelope. Under the lining. Emma retrieved the box from the bedside table, her fingers carefully lifting the faded cardboard lining to reveal a yellowed envelope beneath. Inside was a letter, the paper thin with age and a small key. What is this? She asked, holding them up. The deed to the cottage, Thomas said. And the key. Eleanor's parents left it to her when they died. After she passed, I couldn't bear to sell it. I kept paying the taxes, maintaining it from a distance. No one's lived there for 30 years, but it's still standing. Still waiting. Emma stared at the key in her palm. You kept the cottage? All this time? Thomas nodded, his eyelids growing heavy. It belongs to the Winters family. To Eleanor's blood. That's you now. His breathing grew more labored. Maybe you'll find some peace there, like we did. The monitors began to chime softly, alerting to Thomas's declining oxygen levels. Emma should have called for the doctor, should have followed protocol, but instead, she moved closer, still holding his hand. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. For the stories, for the cottage, for finding me. Thomas's lips curved into a faint smile. Not a coincidence you being my nurse. Eleanor always did have a way of arranging things. Even from beyond. His eyes drifted closed, his breathing becoming more shallow. Emma sat beside him as the night passed, watching the life slowly ebb from the last connection to her father's family. Not as a nurse now, but as family, the family they should have been all along. Thomas Callahan died at 3:17 a.m., his hand still held in Emma's, his face peaceful in the dim light of the hospital room. Emma allowed herself to weep then, for all they had lost, for all the years they might have had. 2 weeks later, Emma stood in front of the white cottage with blue shutters, key in hand. The autumn leaves swirled around her feet as she walked up the stone path, just as she had as a child, just as her father had, just as Eleanor and Thomas had decades before. The key turned easily in the lock, as though the door had been waiting for her. Inside, the cottage was like a time capsule, furniture draped in sheets, the air still and cool, sunlight filtering through dusty windows. Emma moved from room to room, trailing her fingers over surfaces, feeling the history beneath her touch. On the mantelpiece, she found photographs she recognized from Thomas's collection. Eleanor and Thomas on their wedding day, the Winters family gathered on the porch, her father as a young boy with his arm around his Aunt Marion. And there, in a small frame she hadn't noticed before, was a picture of herself as a child, standing with her father in front of this very cottage. Thomas had kept it all these years, this fragment of the family that had continued without him. Emma sank onto the sheet-covered sofa, clutching the photograph to her chest as tears flowed freely down her cheeks. The cottage creaked and settled around her, as though embracing a long-lost child finally returned home. When the tears subsided, Emma stood and began to remove the sheets from the furniture, opening windows to let in the fresh lake air. There was much to do: cleaning, repairs, decisions about what to keep and what to change. But as she worked, Emma felt something shifting inside her, the rigid boundaries she had constructed around her heart slowly beginning to crumble. Here, surrounded by the physical evidence of a family history she'd never known, the past and future seemed to converge, offering her a foundation she had been missing. That evening, as the sun set over Lake Erie, Emma sat on the porch swing, a cup of tea in her hands, watching the play of light on the water. For the first time in years, the crushing loneliness that had become her constant companion seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of belonging she had forgotten was possible. In her pocket was her phone, with a newly dialed number she had avoided for too long. Her mother, waiting in Florida, unaware of all that had transpired. It was time to rebuild that bridge too, to share what she had discovered, to begin healing the fractures in her family story. And beside her on the swing lay her letter of resignation from the hospital and an application for a position at the small medical clinic in Lakeside, a chance to start fresh in a place that somehow, despite all the years and all the loss, felt like home. A nurse's kind gesture to a dying patient had indeed uncovered a family secret that changed her forever, not just through the inheritance of a cottage or the discovery of family ties, but through the realization that the boundaries she had built to protect herself had also imprisoned her. In letting go of them, in opening herself to the pain and joy of connection, Emma had found her way back to herself. As darkness fell, Emma went inside the cottage, turning on lights that had been dark for decades, breathing life back into spaces long abandoned. In the corner of the living room, she found an old record player that reminded her of her father's. On impulse, she checked to see if it still worked, finding to her surprise that it did. In a cabinet nearby, she discovered a collection of vinyl records, among them the same jazz album her father used to play on Sunday mornings while making pancakes. Emma placed it carefully on the turntable, and as the first notes filled the cottage, she closed her eyes and felt the circle complete. Tomorrow would bring more discoveries, more decisions, more steps forward on this unexpected path. But tonight, in this moment, Emma Winters stood in the center of her inherited history, finally understanding that the greatest gift Thomas had given her wasn't the cottage or the key, or even the family connections. It was the permission to open her heart again, to risk the pain of love for the promise of belonging. Outside, the lake lapped gently against the shore, constant and changing like memory itself. And inside, a woman danced alone to her father's favorite song, no longer alone at all.